Come on, just a little bit more. Just one more bite for me.
The afternoon sun streamed through the windows of Chef Daniel Moreau's small bistro, casting golden light across the copper pots and wooden cutting boards that filled his intimate kitchen. At 36, Daniel had spent the last 8 years pouring his heart into Petit Coeur, a neighborhood restaurant that specialized in the kind of comfort food that reminded people of home, even if they had never experienced such warmth before. Today had been particularly quiet, with only a handful of lunch customers trickling in between the usual afternoon lull. Daniel was preparing ingredients for the evening service when he heard an unusual sound from the dining room. The unmistakable cry of a very young, very hungry baby. Through the kitchen service window, Daniel could see a woman in an expensive navy business suit standing near the entrance, rocking an infant who couldn't have been more than 6 months old. The woman looked exhausted and overwhelmed, her blonde hair slightly disheveled despite her otherwise polished appearance. Catherine Williams had been driving home from yet another failed board meeting when little Oliver had begun crying inconsolably. As the CEO of Williams Enterprises, a multinational corporation she had inherited from her father, Catherine was accustomed to solving complex problems with logic and efficiency. But 6 months into motherhood, she was discovering that babies operated by entirely different rules. Oliver's father had left when he learned about the pregnancy, claiming that Catherine's demanding career and his own ambitions were incompatible with family life. Since then, Catherine had been struggling to balance running a billion-dollar company with the overwhelming demands of caring for an infant, often feeling like she was failing at both. Today's meeting had been particularly devastating. The board was questioning her leadership, suggesting that her recent distraction and fatigue were affecting her decision-making. The irony wasn't lost on her that the same people who had once praised her dedication to the company were now criticizing her for the very human challenge of being a working mother. Oliver's cries intensified, and Catherine felt tears of frustration and exhaustion begin to form in her eyes. She had tried everything: feeding, changing, rocking, singing. Nothing seemed to calm him, and she was beginning to feel like the kind of failure she had never been in business. Daniel watched this scene unfold with growing concern. He recognized the desperate expression of a parent at their wits' end. Having experienced it many times during his own journey as a single father to 7-year-old Sophie, who was currently at school but would be joining him at the restaurant later for homework time. Without thinking, Daniel removed his apron and walked into the dining room. "Excuse me," he said gently to Catherine. "I'm Daniel, the chef here. Would you like to sit down? You look like you could use a moment to catch your breath." Catherine looked up, embarrassed to be seen in such a state by a stranger. "I'm sorry, we're disturbing your restaurant. I was just driving by when he started crying, and I thought maybe if I got out of the car—" "Please don't apologize," Daniel said warmly. "Babies have their own schedules, don't they? Why don't you have a seat and let me see if I can help?" Catherine hesitated, but Oliver's continued crying and her own exhaustion made the decision for her. She sank into a nearby chair, still rocking the baby gently. "How old is he?" Daniel asked, washing his hands at the small sink behind the bar. 6 months, Catherine replied. "He's usually not like this, but today nothing seems to work. I've tried feeding him, but he won't take his bottle." Daniel studied the baby's red, scrunched face and the way he was moving his tiny fists. Years of experience with Sophie had taught him to read the subtle signs of infant distress. "May I?" Daniel asked, extending his arms toward Oliver. Catherine looked surprised, but handed him over, partly out of desperation and partly because something about Daniel's calm confidence suggested he knew what he was doing. The moment Daniel took Oliver into his arms, something magical happened. The baby's cries began to soften, not stopping entirely but becoming less frantic. Daniel began a gentle swaying motion, combined with a soft humming that seemed to resonate with something deep in Oliver's tiny being. "Sometimes they just need a different rhythm," Daniel explained quietly. "Each baby has their own song." Catherine watched in amazement as Oliver's crying gradually subsided. "How did you do that?" "Practice," Daniel smiled. "My daughter Sophie was colicky for the first few months. I learned that sometimes they're not hungry or uncomfortable, they're just overwhelmed by the world. It's a lot to take in when you're that small. As Oliver settled into Daniel's arms, the chef began to move toward the kitchen. Would you mind if I tried something? I have an idea that might help. Curious and grateful for any solution, Catherine followed Daniel into the warm, aromatic kitchen. She watched as he continued to hold Oliver with one arm while reaching for ingredients with the other. "What are you doing?" Catherine asked. "Making baby food," Daniel replied simply. "Fresh, real baby food. Not the jarred stuff, but something that actually tastes like food should taste." Daniel selected a small sweet potato from his vegetable bin, quickly peeling and dicing it with practiced efficiency. He added it to a small pot with a splash of low-sodium vegetable broth and a tiny pinch of cinnamon. "At 6 months, he can handle simple solids," Daniel explained as he worked. "But most commercial baby food tastes like cardboard. Babies have taste buds too. They deserve something delicious." As the sweet potato cooked, Daniel continued to hold Oliver, who had now stopped crying entirely and was watching the kitchen activity with wide, curious eyes. The combination of Daniel's gentle movements, the warm kitchen aromas, and the soft bubbling sounds seemed to fascinate the baby. Catherine found herself transfixed by the scene. In her corporate world, problems were solved through analysis, strategy, and implementation. But watching Daniel work, she realized there was another kind of problem-solving, intuitive, nurturing, and based on genuine care rather than efficient outcomes. "You're really good with him," Catherine said softly. "Babies are honest," Daniel replied, testing the sweet potato with a fork. "They tell you exactly what they need. You just have to learn their language. Adults complicate things, but babies keep it simple. They want to feel safe, loved, and nourished." Daniel mashed the cooked sweet potato until it was perfectly smooth, then let it cool to the right temperature. He tested it carefully before offering a tiny spoonful to Oliver, who immediately opened his mouth and accepted the food eagerly. "He loves it," Catherine breathed, watching her son eat with more enthusiasm than she had seen in weeks. "Real food tastes better than processed food," Daniel said simply. "Even babies know the difference." As Oliver continued eating, Catherine found herself really looking at Daniel for the first time. His hands were gentle but confident, his movements economical but never rushed. There was something deeply peaceful about watching him work, a sense that this was a man who understood the fundamentals of caring for others. "Are you married?" Catherine found herself asking, then immediately felt embarrassed by the personal question. "Divorced," Daniel replied without judgment. "My ex-wife decided that restaurant life wasn't compatible with her vision of family stability. She moved to California 3 years ago. Sophie lives with me full-time now. That must be difficult, running a restaurant and raising a daughter alone." Daniel shrugged. "We make it work. Sophie does her homework here after school, helps with simple prep work, and learned to appreciate good food early. It's not conventional, but it's our normal." As Oliver finished the sweet potato, Daniel prepared a small bottle with slightly warmed formula. The baby accepted it readily, his earlier distress completely forgotten. "How did you know he would eat for you when he wouldn't eat for me?" Catherine asked, a note of sadness in her voice. Daniel considered his answer carefully. "Sometimes when we're stressed or anxious, babies pick up on that energy. You've probably been having a difficult day, and Oliver could feel your tension. When I took him, I was calm and focused, so he relaxed too." Catherine felt tears begin to form again, but this time they weren't tears of frustration. "I feel like I'm failing at everything lately. The company, motherhood, life in general. I used to be good at solving problems, but I can't figure out how to be the mother he needs." "Being a parent isn't about having all the answers," Daniel said gently, settling Oliver into a makeshift bed he had created using clean kitchen towels. "It's about showing up every day and trying your best. Some days your best looks different than other days, and that's okay." Catherine watched as Daniel cleaned his hands and began preparing what looked like a more elaborate meal. "What are you making now?" "Dinner for a tired mother," Daniel replied. "When did you last have a real meal?" Catherine tried to remember and realized she couldn't. "I've been living on coffee and protein bars for weeks." "That explains why you're exhausted," Daniel said. beginning to sauté vegetables with olive oil and fresh herbs. You can't take care of anyone else if you're not taking care of yourself. Over the next hour, as Oliver slept peacefully in his improvised bed, Daniel prepared a simple but nourishing meal: herb-roasted chicken with root vegetables, a side of quinoa pilaf, and a small salad with vinaigrette made from scratch. The aromas filled the kitchen, and Catherine realized how hungry she had been without even knowing it. "You don't have to do this," Catherine protested weakly. "I can pay you, of course, but you must have other customers." "I don't have other customers right now," Daniel interrupted gently. "And even if I did, sometimes the most important service is the one you didn't plan to provide." When Sophie arrived from school, a bright 7-year-old with her father's dark eyes and an easy smile, she immediately gravitated toward the sleeping baby. "Dad, who's this?" she whispered, peering at Oliver with fascination. "This is Oliver, and this is his mom, Catherine," Daniel explained. "They needed a little help today." Sophie nodded seriously, as if helping strangers was a perfectly normal part of restaurant life. "Can I help make him more baby food? I remember when Cousin Emma was little. She loved the apple cinnamon you made." Catherine watched this easy interaction between father and daughter, seeing a family dynamic that was both unconventional and deeply loving. Sophie clearly felt safe and valued in this kitchen environment, contributing to the family business in age-appropriate ways. "You know," Catherine said as she ate the most delicious meal she had tasted in months, "I've eaten at some of the finest restaurants in the world, but this might be the best food I've ever had." "Good food is about more than expensive ingredients," Daniel replied, watching Sophie carefully stir a small pot of apple and cinnamon for Oliver's next meal. "It's about intention, care, and sharing it with people who matter." As the evening progressed, Catherine found herself opening up about the challenges of her situation, the pressure from the board, the isolation of single motherhood, and the guilt of feeling like she was failing at the most important job she had ever had. "The irony is that I run a company with thousands of employees, manage budgets in the hundreds of millions, and make decisions that affect people's lives every day," Catherine confided. "But I can't figure out how to make my own baby stop crying." "Different kinds of intelligence," Daniel observed. "Business intelligence and emotional intelligence aren't the same thing. One doesn't make you automatically good at the other." "How did you learn?" Catherine asked. "How did you figure out how to be both a single parent and maintain your career?" Daniel was quiet for a moment, watching Sophie teach Oliver to play peekaboo while he napped intermittently. "I had to redefine what success looked like. Instead of trying to be perfect at everything, I focused on being present for what mattered most. Some days that meant closing the restaurant early for Sophie's school play. Other days it meant bringing her to work when childcare fell through." "Didn't that hurt your business?" "Initially, yes. But over time, I discovered that the customers who valued what we were really offering understood and respected that family comes first. The ones who didn't weren't really my customers anyway." Catherine pondered this as she watched Daniel effortlessly balance professional competence with parental attentiveness. "What we're really offering," she repeated. "What are you really offering here?" Daniel smiled, looking around his modest but warm kitchen. "A place where people feel cared for, where the food nourishes not just their bodies, but something deeper, where families can be families without apology." As the evening wound down and Oliver prepared for another feeding, Catherine realized she felt more relaxed and hopeful than she had in months. Daniel's simple act of helping with her baby had shown her a different way of approaching both motherhood and leadership. "Daniel," she said as she prepared to leave, "I want to ask you something, and please feel free to say no." "I'm listening." "Would you consider catering the executive lunches for my company? Not the big formal events, but the smaller board meetings and leadership sessions. I think my colleagues could benefit from the kind of nourishing approach you bring to food." Daniel looked surprised. "That's very generous, but I'm not sure Petit Coeur is set up for corporate catering. What if we brought the meetings here instead?" Catherine suggested. "Small groups, intimate settings, real conversations over real food. I think it might change the whole dynamic of how we do business." Over the following months, Catherine became a regular at Petit Coeur, sometimes for business meetings, but often just for the peace of mind that came from knowing Oliver would be welcome and well cared for. Daniel's approach to hospitality had taught her that leadership didn't always mean having all the answers. Sometimes it meant creating space for authentic human connection. The small restaurant became known among Catherine's business circles as a place where deals were made over genuine conversation and where the food was prepared with an attention to detail that reflected deeper values about quality and care. Sophie became Oliver's unofficial big sister, teaching him simple games and helping Daniel prepare special baby meals that Oliver devoured with enthusiasm. Catherine found herself looking forward to these family-style evenings more than any business dinner she had ever attended. "You know," Catherine said one evening as they watched Sophie read a picture book to Oliver while Daniel finished closing the kitchen, "I never thanked you properly for that first day." "For what?" Daniel asked, though he was smiling. "For showing me that the recipe for taking care of people isn't complicated. It just requires attention, patience, and genuine care." Daniel looked at Catherine holding Oliver, who was now a chubby, happy 10-month-old with a smile that could light up the room. "I think you've learned that recipe pretty well yourself." "I had a good teacher," Catherine replied, then added quietly, "Actually, I had 2 good teachers." And as Oliver giggled at Sophie's animated reading, Catherine realized that sometimes the most important business lessons come not from boardrooms or textbooks, but from watching someone pour love into the simple act of feeding others. Daniel hadn't just helped her calm a crying baby. He had shown her how to nourish the parts of life that truly mattered. The recipe for love, it turned out, was surprisingly simple. Start with attention, add generous portions of patience and care, and serve with the understanding that the most important ingredient is always the intention behind it. If this story warmed your heart and reminded you that the best solutions often come from approaching problems with love rather than just logic, please give it a like and share it with someone who needs to remember that caring for others starts with caring for ourselves. Subscribe for more stories about finding unexpected wisdom in everyday moments, and let us know in the comments about a time when someone's simple act of kindness taught you something profound about life. Sometimes the most important recipes aren't written down anywhere except in the hearts of people who understand what truly nourishes us.